All right, we're back. This presentation, we're going to spend some time looking at realism to impressionism, mid 19th century art. Hope you got something warm to drink or snacking. Take advantage of this virtual thing. Comfy clothes and good snacks. I got myself a never ending pot of coffee here as we work our way through this piece. I also left my arts and culture book in my room at school, not thinking that I'd be a month away at least from that room. So to help us on our journey, be using this book, The Story of Art by E.M. Gombrich. I got it from the library before they closed down forever. And then also Gardner's Art Through the Ages. So these two textbooks will be kind of the stuff that I'm using to help our study through these artistic works. All right. So a brief review of where we've been. Bottom left, you see Caravaggio, right, in the Baroque era, all that different stuff with light that they did, tenebrism, chiaroscuro, lots of drama, lots of action. You see here the pointed hand of Jesus calling Matthew, descending along this beam of light to get, again, this kind of didactic sense of using art to teach religious ideas. Top left, the Rococo period. This is The Swing by Fragonard. We get the sense of this trivial Parisian sort of gossipy salon, oozing with kind of sexual intrigue and aristocratic decadence that was characteristic of this somewhat trite time, despite the fact, of course, that the French Revolution was knocking on the doorstep. Top right, the neoclassical era, looking here at the death of Socrates. Despite the fact that Socrates was old at this point, he's displayed idealistically strong, suggesting the power of his reason as he, his hand hovering over this cup of hemlock, prepares to drink this poison rather than cease his task. This neoclassicism, we said, is also didactic, teaching secular principles, whereas the Baroque era sought to teach religious principles. Bottom right and center, we're moving towards Romanticism, two different views of this tremendous individualism, but both based on this sense of the sublime. Bottom right, this individual conquering nature, standing with his back to us, and yet we're able to read in his posture this sense of conquering and victory. The middle here, evoking these sublime feelings of the grotesque and something that is rather disgusting, is Goya's Kronos, or Saturn, devouring his children. We see here a tremendous movement away from something like Michelangelo's David, which is this Renaissance vision of an idealistic person, to hear this kind of horrifying display of vulgarity. So that's where we've been, all right? A quick kind of around the world of the art that we've looked at so far. I know it's been quite a break. Wanted to reorient us to where we've been. The Baroque era, Rococo, neoclassical, and then Romantic movements. And that sets us up then for realism. So realism skates in on the heels of Romanticism, pushing back on some of this idealistic way of viewing the world in America in 1850, which is where we are about the middle of the century. We're gearing up for Civil War. And when Civil War comes in, all these high and lofty visions of the individual and of the romantic thinker kind of fall by the wayside. It's kind of hard to imbibe that same sense of romanticism when you're faced with such a horrific reality as war. And Europe, of course, during this time period as well, is being shaken by different wars. And so realism comes in, suggesting a different way of looking at the world. And Courbet here, Gustave Courbet, is the quintessential realist. In this quote by him on the left-hand side, he describes painting as an essentially concrete art that can consist only of the representation of things both real and existing. An abstract object, invisible or non-existent, does not belong to the domain of painting. Show me an angel and I'll paint one. So here we get the sense of the realism of nature, and the painting being a direct copy of what is visible in nature, which is very similar to what the Greeks and the Romans were doing as well. But what Courbet does here is he gives dignity to very commonplace things. So this picture here on the right, the meeting, it's just three dudes out on the road. There's no sense here that there's an illusion or there's a symbol or there's that ever evasive deeper meaning. It's just three guys standing together. And the goal of the painting is not to speak to some symbolic heroism or some illusion of a biblical or ancient mythological character, but instead just to present things as they are and to say, here's the reality of these guys. And so we're looking now at something that is a little bit more interested in the everyday and giving a sense of grandeur to the everyday. Courbet here pictured himself as the painter. You see the other title here. He's just a sojourner. He's not some lofty intellectual, certainly not Socrates, right? Kind of idealized in this painted way. Instead, he's just a dude among dudes with a cool dog in between them. Okay, so this is a very famous piece. Just give you a second to look at it while I take a swig. Again, in this picture called The Gleaners, I should say painting, not picture, called The Gleaners by Millet, you get the glorification of the peasantry. You get poor people working, and here there's, again, no greater idea or symbol that's conveyed. Anything that is greater or symbolic is entirely on the reader to decide, but in this piece, we're getting a picture that's almost like a photograph. And what's interesting about realism is that it comes on the heels of photography. Photography, as a newly discovered innovation, is giving a sense of being able to capture reality, to have a genuine seeing, that you can look at something and you can capture it as it appears. And the realism kind of skates in on the heels of that. This is another piece by Courbet. A couple interesting things in this that are kind of photographic. So you'll see that this is a panorama scene that kind of takes in the whole breadth of something. It's a little bit difficult to figure out where your eye is supposed to fall. There's a clear sort of whiteness here around the priest, but there's also a whiteness here around this dog, which is an interesting juxtaposition, right? That you have, again, your eye is naturally taken to something that should have a kind of religious or sacramental quality to it, but it's also taken by the same token, no other reason for our eye to fall there than its whiteness. Neither of them are in the center of the piece, to a dog, right? Which suggests, what does it suggest? We also have the white bonnets of these older ladies as they're looking away from the scene. So what are we looking at? Well, there's openness in the ground here, which suggests that we're present at a funeral. But the painting kind of cuts off in the middle, much like a picture would. If you were to take a picture of this crowd, you would have, half of this person's body and half of this person's body. And the sense here is that we have like a clear sense of individualistic and detailed realistic expression in each of these faces, but it's just capturing a moment. It's not giving us a specific sense of the drama here. So this Burial at Ornans by Courbet, again, no single focal point, which creates a sense of that missing heroism or drama of any of the periods that we've looked at so far, specifically the Baroque and the Romantic period. Gardner says, the heroic and the sublime and the terrible are not found here. Only the drab facts of undramatized life and death. This is, there's no specific thing that draws our attention here. We're just looking at a burial. And that makes it commonplace. It's not the burial at Ornans in which we'd want to look it up and what is this symbolic of and what happened here. We're just driving in our car and we pass by a graveyard and there's a funeral happening, and Courbet paints it exactly as we would see it, with no sense of any other understanding or deeper meaning than the fact that here it is. Here's an American piece by a Philadelphian artist. Start to see some things that start to feel, we'll see in a bit, a little bit impressionistic. We're not having quite as detailed or as refined form as Courbet, but in this piece, The Thankful Poor by Tanner, we again get a sense of just a commonplace scene where we're endowed here. The meaning that's endowed here is for the viewer to decide, but there's something very picturesque about this, if not sublime. So we get a sense of something that is meaningful to look at, but might not have that sort of awe-inspiring, inspirational quality. So the Romantics had their own responses to this. I'm sorry about where my face is here. To this realism, and the pictures that you see on the left and right both seem to embody the same sense of realism in its portrayal, but are also very clearly dramatic. Certainly, this bottom right one, this flurry of movement and this tremendous sense of the whiteness of these horses creates a juxtaposition. So we don't get to look at too many female artists. So I wanted to look at this piece, The Horse Fair. Again, here in the middle, we get a clear vocal point that focuses here on the energy and the power and the grandeur of these horses, while we're in this thing that feels kind of like we're moving in a circle, right? Everything is painted in a way that suggests tremendous realism, but there's still a drama here. There's still a sense of something that feels heroic, that feels noble, as we watch this almost centrally located black and white horse struggle and rear, I guess. No, what's the word? This piece by John Everett Millais, Ophelia, is also probably one of the most famous portraits of Ophelia. So if you recall the story, of course, Ophelia is Hamlet's spurned lover in the play. When we were back together, we looked at a brief moment between the two of them. Did we? Actually, I don't think that we did. But Ophelia commits suicide at the end of Act 4 of the play. And in this piece, we get a sense here of her almost this rigor mortis, this death that she's in. The flowers of her dress become kind of bladed into what seems like it could be flowers on the pond itself. She looks like she's in a casket, and yet there still maintains this sense of something that has a sublimity about it. Everything is organized to create a meaning. And here, of course, now we're looking at something that is connected to high literature. It's not just a random scene. It's something that's endowed with this kind of illusion. So these are romantic responses to realism, give us that same sense of detail and ornateness, while providing still a sense of drama and of heroism.